Bible nerds, welcome back to Chapters and Chuckles by Kaye, where we dive into the Bible chapter by chapter. Today is Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 23. So it has travelers from far away, political panic in Jerusalem, a suspicious king, a lot of dreams, and multiple trips that would absolutely destroy your monthly gas budget. Just a quick heads up before we start. This chapter includes violence against children, so when we get to that part, I'll keep the tone, respectful and straightforward. And this chapter is going to be, or this episode is going to be very, very short. Okay, so here, let's see. So let's start. Matthew says that Jesus is born in Bethlehem during the time of King Herod. Then Magi from the east, they're called Magi, come to Jerusalem asking where the child is who has been born King of the Jews. So let's talk about Magi. Because, your Christmas decorations have probably been lying to you. Matthew does not say three kings. They're not really three kings. He doesn't even say three. The number is a later tradition based on three gifts. Because there were three gifts, right? So people assume that there were three people who gave the three gifts. So the original word for Magi is magoi. And depending on how you translate and explain it, you're basically looking at learned outsiders associated with star reading and astrology in the ancient world. So if you grew up with, we the three kings, just know Matthew is like, I said what I said and it wasn't that. Okay, so the Magi say that they saw his star, and they've come to, here's where translation diverge. So NIV and ESV often say worship. NRSVUE often say pay him homage. So that difference matters. That's why when we're reading the Bible, we shouldn't just read just one translation. You should have at least two translations to see what word was used for whatever you're reading. So again, the difference matters because in the ancient world, you can bow down to a king without thinking the king is literally God. But Matthew is also writing a story where big theological meanings are stacking up like pancakes. And King Herod, when he hears about a rival king of the Jews, Matthew says he's disturbed and the whole city is disturbed with him. It reads like a political fear went citywide instantly. So here's a historical gut check. In ancient sources, Herod's reputation includes paranoia and brutal actions, even within his own family. So Matthew's picture of a threatened ruler who responds violently fits the general character profile we get from outside the New Testament. So even if we still have to ask hard questions, hard questions about specific events. Herod's leadership style is, if I can't have peace, nobody can. Sounds like, some wannabe ruler that I know, but I digress. So Herod calls religious scholars and asks where the Messiah is supposed to be born. They quote the prophet Micah in Bethlehem. Which says Bethlehem. So the experts know the answer. The irony is that Matthew doesn't show them going anywhere. It's literally just right there, and they never went. So the outsiders travel. The insiders never bothered. They just stayed put. Then Herod privately interviews the Magi about timing, and sends them to Bethlehem with a fake friendly request to, report back. Um, so the irony is that the king uses religious information like a weapon, while the foreigners use it like a map. Matthew says the star goes ahead of them and stops over the place where the child is. Then they rejoice, find the child with his mother Mary, and they bow down and give gifts. They give gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So, two quick details. First, Matthew says house, not manger. So, different camera angle than from the book of Luke. Different storytelling emphasis. Second, Matthew's language piles on joy in a way that sounds almost excessive. It's like the text is saying, these outsiders are thrilled to find this child. Now, the fun detail. In Greek, the phrase translated in the east can also mean at its rising. Because, they're kind of like from the same direction. The sun rises from the east, in the whatever. Yeah. Anyway, so there's a legitimate translation debate here. The point isn't that Matthew is teaching astronomy. The point is that Matthew uses sky language that ancient readers could associate with um, signs, and he uses that to move foreigners toward Israel's Messiah. Then comes the dream. The Magi are warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, so they return home using a different route. So divine guidance in Matthew 2 is basically turn on, notifications, but make it first century. So Joseph has a dream. An angel warns him to get up. Take the child. So this is after, the Magi has left. So Joseph has a dream. An angel warns him to get up, take the child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and stay until further notice because Herod is searching for the child to destroy him. So Joseph obeys, as always, and then they leave by night. Matthew then adds one of his signature moves, saying, This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken through the prophet. Out of Egypt I have called my son. Now, this is where people either gets excited or confused, because if you read Hosea's context, that line is about Israel's past, the Exodus. How can Matthew say it's fulfilled in Jesus? A major scholarly explanation is typology. Matthew treats Israel as God's son in Hosea, and Jesus as embodying Israel's story in a focused way. In that sense, Matthew isn't claiming Hosea predicted a specific travel itinerary. He's claiming Jesus filled up the pattern. God's saving story is replayed and intensified. Matthew reads the Old Testament the way some of us read family group chats. Like, this is about us, actually. Yeah. So let's talk about the killing of the children, then return of Nazareth. So this is the hardest part of the chapter. Matthew says King Herod realizes he's been outwitted, becomes furious, and orders the killing of children 2 years old and under in Bethlehem and its surrounding region. Matthew then quotes Jeremiah, saying, Rachel weeping for her children, you're refusing comfort. So whatever you believe about the mechanics of prophecy, Matthew is refusing to let the horror be brushed aside. He places lament right in the middle of the story. A quick careful note on historical debate. The massacre is not corroborated in surviving accounts of Josephus. And scholars discuss whether Matthew is reporting an event shaping a theological story or both. Some argue the lack of external confirmation matters. Others argue a small localized atrocity could be historically plausible and still not appear in other records. Either way, Matthew's narrative meaning is clear. Violent power tries to erase a threat, and innocent people suffer. Then Matthew says, after Herod dies, Joseph has another dream warning. He plans to return to the land of Israel, but learns that Herod's son, Archelaus, is ruling in Judea. So he's afraid to go there. So after yet another dream warning, the family goes to Galilee and lives in Nazareth. And Matthew ends with the famous line, they lived in Nazareth, so that what had been spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled. He will be called a Nazarene. That line is famous because you can't flip to an Old Testament verse that says it exactly. Scholars debate what Matthew is doing. One major argument is that Matthew signals a general prophetic theme, not a direct quotation. The wording prophets is plural, and the structure differs from places where Matthew clearly quotes a specific passage. So, translation side for the nerds. So the Greek term behind Nazarene is Nazoraios. Definitely butchered that. Nazoraos? I don't know how to say it. But that's the part of the puzzle and part of the identity maker. Imagine moving towns and telling your friends this was foretold. Both inspirational, slightly confusing, especially back then. So Matthew chapter 2 is about guidance and danger. It's not cozy postcard. It's a story where the vulnerable are threatened by powerful fear, and protection sometimes looks like a midnight exit in a long road. So if you're listening as a believer, you might hear a call to trust, to protect, and to take the next faithful step even when it's inconvenient. If you're listening as a skeptic, you might still hear a clear moral warning about what happens when leaders treat other people as disposable, kind of like what's happening right now, not just here in the US, but pretty much everywhere, I believe. So either way, here's a question for the week. Where does fear push you toward control, and where does courage push you toward care? And a simple spiritual practice, if you're unsure what to do next, ask for wisdom, then do the next right size thing to do. Matthew chapter 2 is full of tiny practical obedience moments that adds up to the survival. Okay, fun fact. In Matthew chapter 2, verse 2, the Greek phrase behind in the east can mean at its rising. Some translation notes argue it carries astrological nuance, as I've mentioned. That's why some English versions choose when it rose instead of in the east. Again, that's why it's very important to read multiple versions of the Bible, not just one. Also, Matthew never tells us where there were 3 Magis. The later tradition, that's later tradition. In the text, the only 3 is the gift list. So if you ever see a nativity scene with exactly 3 visitors, just know it's a classic case of, we inferred the cast size from the props pretty much. So next up in Matthew 3, and the story jolts from secret dreams and quiet escapes to a loud public voice in the wilderness. John the Baptist shows up preaching repentance because the kingdom of heaven has come near. The baby in danger story becomes a movement in the open story, and it's about to get real splashy in the Jordan. So that's Matthew chapter 2. Thank you for listening to Chapters and Chuckles by Kaye. If you've enjoyed this episode, please follow or subscribe. You can catch new episodes on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Until next time, stay curious and stay blessed.